substantial improvement. So we need help deciding when an aggregation rule, if we were to adopt one, should be accommodated so that it really is meaningful in terms of substantially improving a particular asset, even if we don't do it on an asset-by-asset basis. So we need that help. And we try to write as clearly as we can, but we have to write technically and specifically, and we hope that others, such as your organization, can have experts like you who can read it and can then help translate it to the people that are making it.
All right. Certainly appreciate the dilemma, the restrictions that you are operating within, and don't take them lightly. We always go to the mission of the legislation is our guiding light, and I don't have all the answers, but I know that is an answer, and we're willing to work very closely with regulators to on that.
Thank you. We have Sarah Brundage from Enterprise Community Partners.
Hello, my name is Sarah Brundage. I'm the Senior Director of Public Policy for Enterprise Community Partners. And on behalf of Enterprise, I want to thank you for this opportunity to offer comments. Enterprise is a leading provider of the development capital and expertise it takes to create decent, affordable homes and rebuild communities. Since 1982, we have raised and invested $43.7 billion in equity, grants, and loans to help build or preserve nearly 585,000 affordable homes in diverse, thriving communities. And Enterprise is launching our own family of qualified opportunity funds intended to advance equitable and inclusive growth in the communities where investments are made. To ensure the tax benefit fulfills its intent, Enterprise recommends that the IRS modify proposed regulations to 1, clarify the treatment of vacant land to prevent land banking, 2, encourage pairing with the low-income housing tax credit and new markets tax credits, and 3, implement requirements to collect and publicly share meaningful data on qualified opportunity fund investments. To the first point regarding the treatment of vacant land to prevent land banking, we believe that subtracting the value of land from qualified opportunity zone property for purposes of the substantial improvement test would be conducive to efforts to preserve affordable housing. However, that same provision could unintentionally result in predatory land banking and long-term land holding. Such an outcome would contradict the goal of making improvements to acquire QZ property. This is particularly true in areas experiencing rapidly rising costs, and the potential for abuse would be especially problematic in the case of land that is vacant, significantly underdeveloped, or with significantly depreciating assets. We therefore recommend that the IRS clarify that in the circumstance where property is being used for low-income housing tax credit properties, the requirement to substantially improve property comply with Section 42 requirements, which are 20%. And with the exception of circumstances with the housing credit, we recommend that the IRS provide a threshold above which land would have to be substantially improved, regardless of any assets or buildings on the property. Without such clarification, it is possible that investors would be able to receive a significant tax benefit for holding valuable land for 10 years without making improvements. And I imagine that you might ask me what a specific number for such a threshold would be, and Enterprise did not provide a specific number. However, we would be happy to default to our partners at Novogradac, who are speaking after me, but I believe also recommended that at least 20% as well. On the second point, Enterprise believes that the true potential of opportunity zones lies in the ability to pair this new source of private capital with existing programs to generate social impact. In particular, the low-income housing tax credit and the new markets tax credit are proven powerful tools with long track records in community revitalization. This round of proposed regulations included provisions that could inhibit the industry's ability to pair these tools, however. The original legislation allows investors to elect between paying the tax on either the original deferred capital gain or the fair market value of the qualified opportunity zone investment in 2026. However, the proposed regulations differ from the original legislation and instead require investors to elect between paying the tax on either the original deferred capital or the capital gain that would result from the sale or transfer of the QZ investment. So we strongly urge the IRS to ensure the viability of pairing these incentives, and in particular ask that the IRS clarify that the fair market value excluding debt plus any cash flow distributions to investors be the standard for calculating a deferred tax bill in 2026 for low-income housing tax credit projects. We believe clarification on these regulations would allow housing credit projects to compete with market rate projects and help us maximize the impact that we can have in low-income communities by leveraging other federal programs. We also recommend adjustments to the proposed regulations stating that the actual corporate subsidiary with the capital gain has to be the one that makes the investment in a QOF. This could be problematic for banks that invest in housing credits through a community development corporation, but which may have capital gains in another corporate affiliate. Therefore, we recommend that the IRS allow taxpayers investing in qualified opportunity funds that then invest in low-income housing tax credit partnerships to use capital gains from consolidated affiliates of the taxpayer. Lastly, we once again urge the IRS to collect and publicly share meaningful data on QF investments. We thank the Treasury for its prior RFI on data collection and tracking for qualified opportunity zones, which we are very pleased to provide our recommendations to. We believe the collection and public reporting of meaningful data on QFs and their investments into designated opportunity zones are critical first steps towards ensuring that the opportunity zone's tax incentive is fulfilling its intended purpose. We provided detailed recommendations on reporting requirements that we hope you take into consideration. So with that, thank you, and we appreciate your time and consideration. Thank you. Any questions?
No, go ahead.
Two things. One, is there something other than debt finance, the debt finance issue, which you think we could do to facilitate pairing the tax incentive here with LIHTC and MTC?
Yeah, good question. So as I stated, I'm on our public policy team, and we asked this of our loan fund team, and as it has been proving difficult at times to pair the two, and this was the only technical recommendation that we were able to identify.
Okay, because when we look at it, one of the things we noticed was that there are some of the benefits that many people get excited about for ozones, which I would be surprised if LIHTC investors were looking forward to. I'm less of a person who has worked with new markets, but I think that there were also changes, there were aspects which didn't seem to be, there were at least no low-hanging fruit and maybe no fruit for how to do that. The other ones, in terms of what the amount to be included in 2026 is, I assume that you would not say that the POP could load up with debt, distribute that out, do so because of the basis lump from the debt, and there would be no income to the investor. And then the historic deferred amount would be reduced close to zero because of the presence of the obligation of the debt. And that didn't seem to be something that we would think you would be advocating, and I don't think it is really consistent with what the
Yeah, I don't
goal of
believe
that
that's our
2026
intent,
is.
yeah.
Well said.
So, in other words, the heartache, if I can call it that, which is produced by looking at what would be the result of getting rid of the debt that is internal to the entity, is the necessary concomitant of a generous rule which allows, at least after that first 2 years, a distribution without tax based on the tax-free nature of that distribution would be predicated on the basis that is derived from the internal borrowing. And I'm willing to bet that we are not getting requests saying that we'd give up the ability to make those distributions if you would give us a net of debt rule for 2026.
Yes, yeah, that is not our intent. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Sarah. Okay, next up is John Sharetti from Novogradac Opportunity Zones Working Group. And once John is done, we're gonna take a 10-minute break. I just think we need one. And then we,
Anybody that has got airplanes to catch and things like that, come up and let us know.
you're up, John.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm John Sharetti from Novogradac & Company, and today I'm representing the Novogradac Opportunity Zone Working Group. On behalf of the working group, we are pleased and want to thank you for our opportunity to give our testimony today. Today I'm going to discuss 3 topics, none of which are original, going 13. But I think it's great that we're aligned in our interests today. So the 3 topics I will be discussing will be the special amount includable rule in the case of an inclusion event for investments in co-op partnerships and S corps. The second topic is the special 10-year exclusion election, which has been talked about a lot today. And then lastly, I'll talk about a grace period for QOFs and Quas-Bs to use property in the trader business. So with respect to the special amount includable rule, just a little overview, the regulations provide a special rule for an inclusion event, the inclusion amount with respect to pass-throughs. It's a little different than the statutory provision in that in the statutory provision, you take the lesser of fair market value or remaining deferred gain, less the basis in the investment. Where with pass-throughs, you take the lesser of the amount of deferred gain, less basis, or the gain that would be recognized on a fully taxable disposition of the investment. We understand why this rule was proposed, that it's intended to prevent taxpayers from avoiding recognizing deferred gain when the fair market value of their investment is diminished due to debt finance distributions. That's what we understand why the rule was presented. However, as Sarah indicated, it is adversely affecting investment in affordable housing and other high-impact community investments. Where the 10-year gain exclusion, as Mike's referred to, is generally less valuable to them, as they don't expect to have appreciation in their investment or much appreciation in their investment at the end of 10 years. However, they were pretty excited about the 2026 inclusion rule, the statutory rule, because it did provide value and that they could recognize this sort of typical loss in value over time at a certain date. So it gave them an accretion in basis. And in my experience of working with a lot of these local housing investors, they were excited. We were seeing non-traditional investors come to the table, and a lot of plans were being made for funds with syndicators and the like. And as soon as the proposed regs came out, it's been quiet. Folks have sort of walked away or stepped back from the opportunity zone. And so, as a result, I I think a lot of aspiring investors have actually turned away from the program. And so we're recommending, as I think Sarah referred to, we're aligned in this, that we make the inclusion rule in 2026 consistent with the mechanics of statutory rule. But that we add back, that we modify the definition of fair market value, and that we use the net value of investment, excluding debt, and then add to that distributions that were made. So these distributions that folks may have made to reduce the value of their investment, we propose that we add these distributions back, which we think prevents this artificial reduction in investment without adversely affecting affordable housing and other community impact type investments in these zones. So that's our first issue. The second issue is with respect to the 10-year exclusion election, which, as I said, many people presented this issue today, and that this proposed rule only applies to capital gains, and only applies to the sale of property by a co-op, not business. It excludes gains realized from the sale of property that's characterized as ordinary income, like 1245 depreciation recapture. And it also excludes any gains that are attributable to the sale of property at the business level. And so it's not on the same page. We think that the rule should be synthesized with the rule for selling your co-op interest, where all gains attributable to the appreciation of property, all property, whether capital or ordinary, or whether the property is held by the co-op or the business, are eligible for exclusion. It's common, as has been said much today, it's common for, especially in multi-asset funds, to exit by selling assets. There's also likely to be a significant amount of operating businesses that will sell assets that produce ordinary gains. We see that in the market, especially in the renewable energy space. And then because most of the qualified opportunity zone property, in our experience, is going to be held by a business, not the co-op, simply because we have this flexibility of time to make our investment with the working capital rule. We think that it's important that we synthesize these two rules and expand the gain exclusion to apply to all gains attributable to the sale of any property used in a trade or business by a co-op or quasi, with the exception of inventory or assets that are held for sale in the ordinary course of business, which is inventory. That was our recommendation. And then lastly, which was sort of hinted on today, with respect to a grace period for quaffs and quasbis on the use of property in a trade or business. And generally, I think folks have talked about a grace period for a qualified opportunity zone business to become a business. And the statute does sort of allude to that, and that the statute says that new businesses must be organized for a purpose of being an opportunity zone business. So they're acknowledging that there is sort of this startup period at the business level. But we know that qualified opportunity zone business property must be used in a trade or business to be considered qualified. And we do have some sort of some safe harbor within the working capital safe harbor that allows you to sort of treat tangible property as existing even before you bought it. But there's really no discussion on use, and there's no discussion on how much time a business gets used the property. So if a fund invests in equipment, let's say, and there's a period of time before they can actually put that in production, is that disqualified property at that point in time, or do they actually have to have it in production? Or even in the case of real estate, where if a business kind of satisfies the safe harbor, but in 31 months, it's not placed in service yet. And so, do they fail the qualified opportunity zone property at that stage because it's not placed in service yet? So, we think that Treasury should consider a rule where a business is not treated as failing to satisfy the use requirements solely because the tangible property is not used in a trade or business before a reasonable startup period. That's sort of, all businesses are different. It's probably, 12 months might be good for some, but some may be different based on the nature of the business. And so before a reasonable startup period, based on the facts and circumstances, is sort of what we're recommended, that a business should have time before they have to use their property. Alternatively, if you do want to provide a safe harbor, provide that businesses have 12 months, but that 12 months doesn't start until after the 31 months. So that's our suggestion. And we're really suggesting this both at the QOF and the QASB level, because even at the QOF level, we have to use this property in a trade or business. So that's completes my testimony today on behalf of the working group.
I'm gonna go first, actually, this time.
Okay.
Thank you, John, for your comments. There's one thing that keeps popping up for me. I was on a panel with Mr. Novogratz, and there seems to be a lot of push to have sort of special rules for affordable housing area, just to make them work. I know Jill talked about historic credits, and I've been asked about new markets. So I don't know if someone could provide me or provide all of us, something with specific rules that you're looking for just for this industry, because it keeps coming up and it's all over the place
Well, I
in
think
different
that,
parts of the regs.
Yeah, I mean, in my experience, I think affordable housing worked well with this program, at least certain types of affordable, bond probably work better than, 4% works probably better than 9%. But, I think that investors are sort of relying on the fact that they are losing value in their investment, and the benefit that they don't get at the end of 10 years, they can sort of accelerate this loss in value in 2026, and it provided enough incentive to encourage non-traditional investment in the space, because we saw it happen. I mean, people were pretty excited about it, and so it's not what you can do to help, it's what you did do to hurt, by giving us
Well, and that's,
that
so,
rule, and I think if you modify that rule, and I understand why you did that rule, because generally, folks could reduce the value of their investment by taking distributions before 2026, and so we suggested one way to modify that. There may be some other ways that don't hurt folks, that are not trying to lose the value of the investment, but naturally, the value may, not be appreciating at least at 2026.
I mean, the reason why I asked is, Mike and I are very familiar with this space,
Mhm.
but a lot of us, the rest of us on the panel and decision makers might not be so familiar with the space, and so I think it would be helpful to highlight
Yeah.
those issues.
That's the one thing I think about, but I think it's something that as a working group, we could convene and come up with some written response to answer that question.
Thanks, John. Two really quick hits. First, on the calculation of the gain, I just want to make sure I'm understanding where you're coming from. But suppose I invest 100 or roll over 100 or whatever term you want to use. So my outside basis is 100. I look at the statute, you look at the deferred gain, $100 over the basis. Zero.
What
I have 100 of gain, but I
outside would be
outside.
zero.
Yeah, so my outside basis is zero, but I put 100 in. So if I turned around and it was suddenly 12/31/26, putting aside the 10 and 5% bump ups, I'd have to pay tax on the 100 of gain. Okay. So I want to make sure I understand where you're coming from with the borrowing. If my gain is 100 and it's tied into that gain less the basis, and there's a borrowing without a debt finance distribution, I am now going to have a basis in my partnership interest of $100. Right?
Because of borrowing.
Because there's a borrowing, 100 of which is allocated to me, 100 of borrowing is allocated to me.
Right, on the inside,
A borrow is $100, a borrow that's allocated to me.
Yeah,
100 that's
yeah,
over
100, yeah, that's
752.
correct.
So now I have deferred gain of 100,
Yeah.
I have a basis of 100 in my partnership interest, right? And I don't think you're suggesting it, but I just want clarification. One way to read the statute literally is to say the excess of the gain deferred 100 over the basis of 100 is the amount you pick up on 12/31/26.
No, I think you have to go net on that
Okay, so you
Moving
back out
on
to
a
that.
basis.
Okay, and so the question really is, when you walk through your calculation, adding back distributions and so on, is that written in your testimony?
It is.
Okay, good, we
It
can
is,
look at that.
yes.
Okay, and then back to the same old question, on the -2C 10-year rule. It sounds like you're trying to get parity between a sale outside and a sale inside, right? Except that to the extent there's, any of the gain is attributable to property held primarily for sale, on a sale outside, that clearly would be excluded, it seems,
That's-
but inside it would not be.
That's right.
Right, so you're not looking for total parity.
Not total parity. I mean, you could always just make a big inventory sale after 10 years and
Right,
bring
right.
excluded, you know?
Right, and again, I've asked others, but would you be in favor of a rule that would require a distribution in order to avail yourself of the benefits of the 10-year rule for sales inside?
Yeah, the first I thought about that is when you asked others, and I'm trying to figure out, other than creating parity.
Yeah.
What else does that?
Yeah, exactly.
It doesn't solve anything, right?
Just one
Yeah,
secret.
right, right.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. All right, so let's take a 10-minute break. It is now, about 2:29, so we'll be back here at 2:40.
I gotta sell.
Krista D'Alessandro. Nice to meet you. Krista. Yeah.
Okay, I noticed you graded pieces. That's amazing. Yeah. Okay, very much.
Good job.
Keep that in mind when you watch it, it's all, you know. Well, they'll see more over
Yeah.
Get it, be like, oh.
Yeah, I know this is.
Harvest Web Castle.
Oh, that's a great idea.
Yeah.
I see.
This is. Because I definitely, their parts were.
Oh, yeah, well, you might have too quiet.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Okay, very good, thank you.
You're welcome.
What's that? Oh, great.
Oh, good.
Oh, okay. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, and Connecticut, who's the one that's really pushing for this. And they said that they want someone who understands. Yes, like financially partnering and creating that. Yeah. Hey. It's not okay, it just kind of, internet kind of cuts in and out, so I have to collaborate. I'm glad. Yeah, no, thanks for I'm in Detroit.
Okay.
Yeah, and I did my Braille Detroit, I'm a library. But I'm in Chicago, I spent my time in Chicago, Detroit, and we are working on this fund, which is created in Connecticut.
I would be very around the George Washington.
Oh, perfect, yeah, good. Thank you so much. Okay. Yeah, thanks.
Oh, these kids are good, you I just want to check on you.
Oh, okay, good, I'm fine.
Yeah, okay. All right, good. Glad you're okay.
I'm good, thank you very much.
Nice talking. Nice talking to you.
You too.
Okay.
Exactly where you're addressing the audience for very smart people and pointing things out.
I'm trying to get up now.
Decent amount.
And I'm pretty tall, so the first one, like, I can't get it.
A little higher?
Interesting. Hasn't really, Facebook much better. Hadn't really thought about the nexus there.
So you carry your apparel.
I charge.
We good? You got lots? Do you have good photos? This?
Wait.
Okay.
It just tells you how I thought of it. I was consulted on every single thing. I laughed at your point.
How are you?
Good, how are you?
Good.
I'm the noted to somebody else's iron pie.
First, I called for, and you go next update, and then I'll come back and cover a range of Yeah. And we, and all the students. No, you're so full.
I don't,
Yeah, some, actually, yeah. I mean, research.
One left, yeah.
Actually,
So I think we'll be okay.
who was it? Alice?
Okay, we should be out of here before 5. Okay, no, thank you for.
I said the battery, on the battery doing well. I'm pretty afraid the battery could have a longer distance.
Thank you, appreciate it very much.
Thank you so much, appreciate it. Okay.
Someone, the same entity needs to look at all things. So I don't know how to.
Almost. get it off, and then they'll call. Get something if there's some of their input all the time.
But if you, they're being asked, they know what they have to sort of find out and kind of the tax part, to say what the purpose.
Yes, that's
And saying the purpose of the purpose is that
that's clearly some treasury is already in the
you know, I think you made the distinction between doing violating the statute and expanding upon that.
I'm sure there's some off out there.
We try.
There's a college student.
It'll be tough, you know, because structure and control inside.
If the rule requires
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
But is there, yeah,
Here's what it is.
meaning if I put something on your floor and you
without someone checking what did the work.
I don't think we really know yet.
Yeah, cause that's.
You're interested in
Again, I don't know where the statute is, so, you know, there's more you can, so. Because, you know, there are more hurdles, it's easier for them to get those types of jobs. So, you know, just be, you know, it sounds a little crazy, but it could be the follow up afterwards.
Oh, the working group?
Hey, how are you? Clayton.
Karen Desterell, nice to meet you.
So I was just saying, our outside counsel.
Okay.
You know, I don't know if we, I don't know, we haven't really considered meeting.
Well, let me at least send you the info.
Yeah, so you can.
Although, we're moving offices, so
Oh, is that right?
keep the cell, you know, the team. We're almost there, Don, almost there.
For what, for this,
Is it a call? Would you like to take it away? Yeah, I recall it. We're good, so.
Good to see you.
Well, I mean, last time, it's just why your questions? Be a little bit more succinct as well.
All right, why don't we, get started for the last act of this public hearing? So we have 5 more speakers. And so our next speakers are Joseph Darby and Christina Rice from the Boston University School of Law, my hometown.
Right, Professor Apples is, you guys decided not to have it look like the mamas and the papas. Anyway, my name is Jay Darby, I'm a tax attorney, proud of it, on behalf of Boston University School of Law. We're going to make a presentation. Joining me is Christina Rice, who's the director of the graduate tax program, the Alabama program at the School of Law. Also joining us is Professor Susan Atlas, who helped pull the submission together. We teach at the well, I'm positive is the first full credit course specializing exclusively in Opportunity Zone Act. You know, because you send it yourselves. Oh, we're making it up as we go, but it's the first semester, obviously.
Modifying it after.
Yeah, oh yeah. But you'll appreciate this. I was helping with the ABA and with the Nova Grad Group and with the Real Estate Roundtable, all answering questions. Every Senate, these are things the Treasury specifically asked for comments on. It's a long list. And I said, this is perfect. My work is done. So I sent it out to the students. Everybody picked a question to answer. And so we got back, 12 answers from 12 students. We put it together in 48 hours. It's got a few typos in there, but it was a ton of fun. So we're going to talk about a bunch of things fairly quickly. I'm going to talk about 1231, which is a particular important issue that I've been sort of, advocating for in every group I've been part of. And then Christina's going to talk about vacant land. I'll come back and do kind of a drive-by, presentation of the rest of the topics. The 1231 issue you're familiar with, the treatment of capital gain came up in the first set of regulations and was treated in a very, very, generous, reasonable way with the special rules for partnerships. The 1231 rules kind of create a lot of stress and tension in the real world marketplace. I have 2 people who